Hello, and welcome to Walking with the Tengu, a podcast exploring classic texts for the modern martial artist. Today, we return to the Zhuang, to a section known as the Inner Chapters. In it, we find a little parable about monkeys and feeding time that demonstrates a principle that the exact same thing, presented one way, can induce anger in people, and yet presented another way can induce contentment. If you haven't listened to the prior Zhuangzi episodes, I'll give you a quick summary for the work. Along with the Tao Te Ching, the Zhuangzi is considered one of the two foundational texts for Taoism. It mostly consists of stories and parables that present philosophical ideas in a succinct manner. Some are humorous, some direct, others abstract, and still others just downright weird. It was written during the late Warring States period, which is broadly 476 to 221 BC. The Zhuangzi is one of my favorite examples of a classical work that, while not directly related to the martial arts, contains stories useful to any martial artist, no matter the style they practice. The story is short enough, I'll just read it without any changes. This version is the James Legge translation from ctext.org, where you can access a vast library of classical Chinese works. So it goes like this. When we toil our spirits and intelligence, obstinately determined to establish our own view, and do not know the agreement which underlies it in the views of others, we have what is called in the morning three. What is meant by that, in the morning three? A keeper of monkeys, in giving them out their acorns, once said, "In the morning I will give you 3 measures, and in the evening 4. This made them all angry, and he said, "Very well, in the morning I will give you 4, and in the evening 3. The monkeys were all pleased. His 2 proposals were substantially the same, but the result of the one was to make the creatures angry, and of the other to make them pleased, an illustration of the point I am insisting on. Therefore, the sagely man brings together a dispute in its affirmations and denials, and rests in the equal fashioning of heaven. Both sides of the question are admissible." End of the story. So what is fundamentally at heart here is the issue of our perceptions. The same truth, that the monkey gets 7 portions of acorns, doesn't change. What changes is how they perceive what is fair, just, or right about the distribution of acorns. In the end, they get the same amount. This principle surrounds us. How something is presented changes the perception of it. So what we have to watch out for in the martial arts is when either a good idea has bad presentation and we wrongly discredit it, or when a bad idea has good presentation and is incorrectly given attention or the appearance of goodness and truth, when in fact it has nothing of the sort. Let's look at a couple of simple, real-world examples. Now, my children are reasonably well educated and on most occasions exhibit good decision-making skills. However, I have been able to artificially manufacture conflict between them when they perceive an injustice in the distribution of something they both desire. Let's say, for the sake of illustration, M&Ms. If I give one a small bowl of M&Ms and another a plate of M&Ms, you can see the little wheels of calculation working overdrive in their mind as they try and figure out whether or not they have the same amount of their sibling. Both the plate and the bowl have the same amount of M&Ms, but one collects them all together in a small contained pile, the bowl, while the other spreads them out 1 layer deep. The plate looks bigger, even though it has the same amount as the bowl. To be fair, when I did this, I used it as an exercise to demonstrate this very principle, having them count them out and then realizing that they have the exact same amount. Now, they like to point out to me when something looks more or less based on how it is plated. This is an example of how our perceptions can perceive value based on how the presentation of something changes. However, the inverse is true as well. When a presentation is meant to make us think we have something good, when in fact we have been given something for less. Consider the cups used in restaurants and bars. There are a variety of different ways an expensive drink can be presented, and most do so in a way to make you feel like you got a fair amount, when in fact you are receiving a small amount of alcohol and being charged quite an expensive amount for it. So much so that if you were to see the amount in a normal glass, you might not decide to buy that drink. The shape of the glass may appear large, but in fact have a small practical volume. The base of the glass may be thick, making the glass appear taller, and thus at first glance appears to have greater volume, while in fact it provides you with less volume than a shorter glass with a thinner bottom. The ice in a drink can also have a significant impact on how much volume is in a drink. Remember, unlike other substances, water expands when it freezes, so in terms of volume, an ice cube takes up more volume as a solid than it does as a liquid. So when I order that fancy whiskey drink at my favorite ramen place, it comes with a large glass with a thick bottom and a massive cube of ice, with barely a finger width of whiskey poured into it, making it look like a decent-sized drink without that much whiskey being provided. For another example, a local boba place here charges people $1 extra if they order their drink without ice. When people order their drinks without ice, more volume in the drink takes up resources that impacts a business's bottom line. If you're curious to see this in action, there are several videos on YouTube you can search for and watch. Now, none of this is inherently good or bad. It's just an example of how a business can lower their costs without lowering their prices, make more money, and provide you with less value simply by changing their cups a little. Another example would be the perception of choice. I found this to be true in a variety of places. If we ask an open-ended question such as, "Where would you like to eat?" we leave any possibility open. However, if we restrict it down to just two choices, would you like to eat at restaurant A or B, we still provide the person with the perception that they've chosen where to eat, but we've reduced the possibilities down to just two locations that we're willing to eat at ourselves. This is especially effective with children. If you tell them to do something, there may be pushback. However, if you frame it as, "Would you like to do X now or in 5 minutes?" when they choose 5 minutes from now, their resistance will be much lower to whatever the task is, because in their perception, this is something they chose. Another example would be the 10 Commandments from Judeo-Christian traditions. Some people find these to be kind of negative, as they're a series of "you shall not do X" statements. The irony is that while couched in negative language, that is, telling someone no words, logically they're all more permissive than the alternative. Imagine, if you will, that we had a list of 100 things a person could do, some good, some bad. And I said, you're allowed to do 10 of them. That means 90 of the things in that list you are not allowed to do. An alternate way to do this is to take the same list and say, here are 10 things you are not allowed to do. What is thus implied, then, is that the other 90 are allowed. So the linguistics of "thou shalt not" is actually more permissive than "thou shalt." One of the things I've been doing over the years is also collecting the equivalents of the 10 Commandments from Taoist and Buddhist sources. I've found quite long lists of "thou shalt nots" over the years. Some, like the Ling Bao scriptures, have 10 commandments of their own that contain many similar moral standards such as don't lie, cheat, murder, steal, etc. Others, such as the Xiang precepts, have 27 commandments, again, all couched in do-not linguistic terms and logic. The point is to be careful with how you perceive positive and negative statements. Sometimes the one that sounds negative is actually more permissive. It's just it's couched in terms that our selfish pride reacts negatively to. So, my first thought when I read this story from the Zhuang about monkeys and acorns was of how often I hear people argue in the martial arts about various topics, and fundamentally they're either talking about the same thing, perceived two different ways, or two very different things that are fundamentally unrelated. The difference is that they're trying to couch it in the same terms without defining what they mean. Common examples could include effective training, whether something works in, air quotes, real life, and so on. However, they never define what they mean by effective or real life. For example, effective training might be brutal, direct, and efficient in terms of preparing a large group of healthy young men for the battlefield. For that purpose, a particular way of training may be very effective. Yet there is a different kind of effectiveness with which we can train normal people to decrease their likelihood of being victimized, or a child from being bullied. One kind of effectiveness may not, in fact, be effective in a different circumstance. Likewise, when people say real life, they can mean a vast array of different things, from battlefield combat to schoolyard bullying to road rage to defending yourself from a patient with psychiatric issues. People will argue about so many different things in an effort to declare someone else's training ineffective and useless. Now, there are reasons to seek for truth, efficiency, and effectiveness in one's art. One must frame that answer by understanding the question first. You may have an answer to one person's effectiveness needs, but not your own. Or you may have your own needs met and not someone else's, and that's okay, as long as you are honest with yourself. For example, you may see someone using something you're not used to. It could be perhaps a tool, a utensil, a piece of clothing, or a martial art. If it is being shown or used by someone that isn't perhaps the best at using it, you may judge the tool based on how poorly it was used by that person, rather than see the potential of the tool in the hands of someone truly skilled. This is a common misconception in many areas of life. In my own art of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, for example, there is often a dislike of forms. And to be fair, I've seen plenty of pointless forms over the years that amount to little more than martial dancing. However, just because that may be true doesn't mean that this is true in all contexts. I personally have found great value in some of the solo BJJ training that has allowed me to work out physical conditioning, flexibility, and efficiency principles on my own, and then to bring them back to a competitive context. The irony is that sometimes for new people, I'll give them what is effectively a solo form, a kata, for them to practice on their own. But I certainly wouldn't call it that, and I certainly wouldn't present it that way to the greater BJJ community, because the same 7 measures of Acorns presented one way induces contempt, and yet the same 7 measures of Acorns presented another way induces understanding and consistent training. If we were to take all the martial arts of the world and take a selection of individuals from each that had only trained for 1 month, would that be a fair representation of each martial art? Obviously not. The problem is that we'll see people who have trained in a martial art for 20 years and have not achieved whatever goal we imagine for ourselves. It's true, there can be a lot of self-delusion in the martial world, but don't confuse that with a difference in goals. They may be self-deluding themselves about their martial ability, whatever that means. You may have a goal that differs from that person over there. You may be preparing for a different set of combative scenarios, and yes, there may be no combative goals. At the end of the day, though, don't judge a style based solely on what problems you are facing. You may have selected the right tool for the job you're facing, but that right answer doesn't even come close to helping another person with what has brought them to the martial arts. In the same way, be careful in your training, that you don't allow some nice presentation to distract you from the fact that they've watered down what they're providing and aren't actually providing you with what you need. That may look like a tall drink of martial arts, but how many useless ice cubes have they packed in there? This problem is probably more common in the martial arts world today. They aren't even providing us with the 7 measures of Acorns. They've taken 2 away, boxed up the remaining 5 in extra fancy-looking containers, and told you it's a special privilege to receive these extra special 5 measures of Acorns, passed down through the generations, and don't ever take them out of the box, and for goodness sake, don't ever actually try to eat them. I'm extending the metaphor a bit here, but the idea comes back to another Chinese work by the Ming Dynasty general Qi Ji Guang, who says, "If you have acquired some skill, you must test it on an opponent. Do not be proud of a win or shamed at a loss. Instead, think, why did I win? Or why did I lose? Then train more and test yourself again." If you don't take those acorns and eat them from time to time, that is, if you don't test out your skills in some kind of format from time to time, what's the point of even receiving them? Are we monkeys even being provided with acorns? Have we been presented with the same or less goods in fancy packaging, or have we fallen for receiving the same thing, just in a manner that is palatable to our base instincts? These are the questions that Zhuang's parable provokes us to consider. Whether you are a teacher trying to find a way to get your students to do the hard, boring work, or a student trying to figure out if you're actually learning what you need, consider the story of the monkeys and the acorns. Our own self-delusion can cause us to flee what we need and seek what harms us, or in some cases is exactly the same thing, just presented in a different way. As always, remember to not just talk about philosophy, but like your martial art, live it.